never thought I'd see the day when my faith, the very thing that held me together through life's storms, would be the same thing that almost broke me. My name is Margaret Collins, but everyone in town calls me Maggie. I'm an 82-year-old retired schoolteacher from Greenville, South Carolina, a small, church-going town where everyone knows everyone's business, and reputation is as sacred as the Sunday morning sermon. For more than 6 decades, my life was about discipline, dignity, and service. I wore my blonde hair, now streaked with silver, in neat curls every Sunday morning, my floral dresses pressed, my pearl earrings in place. I believed in kindness, in forgiveness, in the power of prayer. But nothing in my 82 years prepared me for the 2 betrayals that would collide and push me to the edge of my faith. It started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry in my small but tidy living room when I noticed my husband, Thomas, hadn't returned from his Bible study meeting at the community center. Thomas is 86, a former deacon, and still walks like he's got authority over the ground beneath his feet. We've been married for 58 years. Our marriage had its storms, but infidelity, that was a line I never thought he'd cross. But that day his phone, carelessly left charging on the kitchen counter, buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach twist. Linda May. A widow in our church, 20 years younger than me, known for her wide smile and dresses a little too tight for Sunday service. I didn't mean to pry, but my hands had a mind of their own. I opened the text. Can't wait for tonight. I still remember last Thursday. Followed by a heart emoji. My knees nearly gave out. I held onto the kitchen counter, my heart pounding in my ears. For a few moments I couldn't breathe. I read the thread, long, flirty exchanges, arrangements to meet when I thought he was at the men's prayer group. I sat down on the couch, my vision blurry with tears. My first instinct wasn't to scream at him or throw him out. Thought of my faith, of the vows I took before God. I thought of seeking spiritual guidance, of going to the one man in town I believed could give me counsel, Pastor William Harper. Pastor Harper had been the shepherd of our church for over 40 years. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a booming voice. He baptized my grandchildren, officiated funerals, and preached about forgiveness every Sunday. I'd always respected him, trusted him. The next morning I called his office. Pastor, it's Maggie. I need to speak with you. Privately. It's urgent. His voice was warm. Of course, Maggie. Come by the parsonage tomorrow afternoon. We'll pray and talk it through. I spent that night praying, holding my rosary beads so tight they left little dents in my fingers. I told myself that once I spoke to him I'd find clarity and maybe, just maybe, the strength to forgive Thomas. But when I walked into that parsonage the following day, my life took a turn I never saw coming. He welcomed me in with his usual smile, guiding me to his office at the back of the house. The room smelled faintly of cedar and coffee, with a large wooden cross hanging above his desk. We sat down and I poured my heart out, every text message, every meeting Thomas had lied about. My voice trembled as I confessed how humiliated and betrayed I felt. He listened intently. Or at least I thought he was listening. Then something in his gaze changed. It wasn't the look of a shepherd guiding his sheep. It was something darker, hungrier. Maggie, he said softly, leaning forward. A woman like you doesn't deserve to be treated like that. You've still got so much beauty, so much life in you. Froze. My hands gripped the arms of the chair. I've always admired you, he continued, his voice lower now. Even back when you and Thomas were first married. I never said anything out of respect, but seeing you hurt like this. His eyes moved in a way that made my stomach churn. Before I could respond, he stood up, came around the desk, and placed his hand on my shoulder, slowly sliding it down my arm. My body went cold. Pastor, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't appropriate. He didn't move his hand away. You've been starved of love, Maggie. Let me remind you what it feels like to be wanted. In that moment the betrayal doubled. My pastor, the man I had come to for guidance, was trying to use my pain as an opening to feed his own lust. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Don't you dare touch me," I said, my voice shaking not from fear but from rage. "You're a disgrace to that cross hanging above your desk." He stepped back, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Careful, Maggie. People in this town. They believe me over you." His words echoed in my head as I walked out of that office, my pulse racing. I felt dirty, humiliated, and furious. Two men I trusted, one my husband, one my spiritual leader, had shown me who they truly were. By the time I got home, my tears had dried. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was plotting. Because if Pastor Harper thought I was some weak old woman too afraid to speak, he was about to find out how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and made a call. Not to my husband, not to the church council, but to someone from my past who owed me a favor. When they answered, I said, "It's Maggie. I need your help. And it's going to get messy." When I said, "It's going to get messy," I meant it. The voice on the other end of the line was deep, calm, and familiar. "Maggie, it's been a while." "Yes, Daniel. And I wouldn't be calling unless it was serious." Daniel Brooks wasn't family, but he might as well have been. I'd taught him in the 3rd grade, back when he was a scrawny, bright-eyed boy who could barely keep still in his seat. He'd grown into a man with sharp instincts, first as a police officer, then as a private investigator after leaving the force. Years ago, I'd helped him get a teaching job for his wife when they moved back to Greenville. He'd always told me, "If you ever need anything, Maggie, I'm your man." And now I needed him. I told him everything. About Thomas's affair with Linda May, and about Pastor Harper's sick attempt to take advantage of me in my most vulnerable moment. There was a long pause on the line. "That man's got a clean public image," Daniel finally said. "But I've heard whispers. You're not the first to complain. You might be the first to fight back." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Then I guess it's time to make sure everyone hears the truth." Daniel agreed to meet me the next morning at a small diner off the highway where nobody from church would see us. I barely slept that night, going over every word the pastor had said to me, every smug look in his eyes. My anger was hot, but under it was something sharper: purpose. The next day, the diner smelled like fresh coffee and buttered toast. I sat in a corner booth, wearing a plain beige coat and a scarf pulled low over my face. Daniel walked in, taller now, with broad shoulders and a kind smile, though his eyes were all business. He slid into the booth. "All right, Maggie. If we're going to expose him, we do it clean. Evidence. No one can accuse you of making it up." He nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "First," he said, leaning closer, "we get him to repeat his mistake, but this time it's recorded." The thought made my stomach twist. The idea of facing Pastor Harper again after what he'd done was enough to make my hands shake. But I wasn't the type to back down. "I can do it," I said quietly. Daniel slid a small device across the table. A pen, but not just any pen. "This records audio. Keep it in your purse or hold it when you go see him. And Maggie, you control the conversation. Let him dig his own grave." Over the next few days I prepared myself. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd make him feel comfortable enough to reveal his true intentions. In the meantime, Daniel began digging into Harper's past. Finances, travel, anything suspicious. On the 4th day I made the call. "Pastor Harper," I said, my voice calm but soft. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I'm lonely, and I suppose I didn't give you a fair chance to explain." He took the bait instantly. "Maggie, I'm glad you called. Why don't you come by again? We can talk in private. No rush." That Friday afternoon, I walked into the parsonage with my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. The pen was in my purse, already recording. He greeted me warmly, guiding me into the same office, the same leather chair where he'd crossed the line before. We spoke about Thomas for a few minutes. Small talk meant to lull him in. Then, just like before, his words started to shift. "Maggie," he said, his voice dropping low, I can give you something Thomas hasn't given you in years. You deserve to feel alive again. And there it was. Every sentence, every insinuation, captured on that tiny pen. When I left the parsonage, I didn't even let myself smile. Not yet. There was still work to do. That evening, Daniel called with news that made my blood run cold. "You're not going to believe this, Maggie." Found 3 other women. All widows or older ladies from the congregation. They've all had run-ins with Harper, but they were too afraid to speak. I gripped the phone tighter. Then they won't be afraid anymore. The next Sunday, I walked into church with my head held high and the pen in my purse, knowing exactly when I'd press play. And when I did, every single person in that sanctuary would hear what their man of God really sounded like. Sunday mornings in Greenville had a rhythm of their own. By 8 a.m., the streets were lined with cars heading to one church or another. Women wore floral dresses and hats with matching purses. Men had crisp shirts, polished shoes, and Bibles tucked under their arms. The air was filled with a faint smell of magnolias, freshly cut grass, and coffee brewing in every church kitchen. I had been part of that rhythm for decades. My place was usually the 3rd pew from the front left-hand side, where the sunlight from the stained glass window would spill across my lap during the sermon. But that Sunday was different. My hands weren't holding a Bible. They were holding justice. The pen in my purse, the one Daniel had given me, now carried more than a recording. It carried the weight of truth, the voices of every woman who had been hurt by Pastor Harper but silenced by fear. I had spent the last 2 days contacting the women Daniel found. Each story broke my heart and fueled my determination. Martha Jenkins, 79, said he'd cornered her in the fellowship hall after choir practice. Ellen Price, 85, told me he'd comforted her after her husband's funeral in a way that made her feel sick. Patricia Long, 76, recounted a home visit that turned into something she never wanted to remember. These women had kept quiet for years. Some were afraid no one would believe them. Others feared retaliation from the congregation. But when I played them the recording of my own encounter with Harper, something shifted. The fear in their eyes was replaced with resolve. "We'll stand with you, Maggie," Martha said, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "It's about time someone did." That Sunday, I dressed with precision. A pale blue dress that Thomas once said made me look like spring. Pearls around my neck. My blonde hair curled and pinned neatly, not a strand out of place. If I was going to do this, I wanted to look every bit the respectable, God-fearing woman I had always been, the kind of woman nobody could dismiss. When I walked into the sanctuary, conversations hushed for a moment before resuming. I could feel eyes on me, some curious, some judgmental. Thomas was already there, sitting in the far-right pew next to her. Linda May. My stomach turned, but I didn't let my gaze linger. This was not about him. Not today. Daniel was there too, seated in the back, wearing a suit and tie. His presence was my silent reassurance. If anything went wrong, he'd be my anchor. The choir sang, voices rising in harmony. The congregation stood for the opening hymn, "How Great Thou Art." I mouthed the words, my mind racing through the plan. My moment would come after the sermon, during the special announcements segment, when Harper often invited members to share testimonies. Pastor Harper walked up to the pulpit, Bible in hand. He wore a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his smile confident. "Good morning, brothers and sisters," he boomed, his voice filling the sanctuary. "It's a blessing to see so many familiar faces today." I studied him closely as he preached. He spoke about forgiveness, about resisting temptation, about living a life pleasing to God. The hypocrisy was almost unbearable. Every time he said the word purity, I felt the weight of the pen in my purse. When the sermon ended, Harper closed his Bible and smiled warmly. "Before we close in prayer, I'd like to open the floor for any testimonies or announcements. Is there anyone here who feels led to share?" My hand went up. His eyes flickered, surprise, maybe even a hint of caution. "Sister Maggie," he said, "please come forward." I walked down the aisle, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor. My heart pounded, but my face was calm. The congregation watched, curious. Some smiled at me encouragingly, unaware of what was about to happen. When I reached the front, I turned to face them all. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear. "Most of you know me. I've been part of this church for over 50 years. I've celebrated weddings here, mourned losses here, and raised my children under this roof. I've always believed this was a place of safety, of truth." I paused, letting the words sink in. Harper stood slightly to the side, his hands clasped, his expression carefully neutral. "But something happened recently that I can't keep to myself," I continued. "And I believe you all deserve to hear it. Not just for my sake, but for the sake of every woman who sits in these pews." From my purse I took out the pen. "This is a recording," I said. "A recording of a conversation between myself and our pastor." A ripple went through the congregation. Harper stepped forward slightly. "Maggie, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No, Pastor," I said firmly. "We will discuss it here. In front of everyone." "Press play." His voice filled the sanctuary. Clear. Undeniable. The same voice that had just preached about righteousness now spoke in low, suggestive tones. "Maggie, I can give you something Thomas hasn't given you in years. You deserve to feel alive again. I've always admired you. Seeing you hurt like this, I can make it better for you." Gasps erupted from the congregation. Some women covered their mouths. Men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Linda May's eyes widened, and Thomas looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I let the recording play until the very end, until his smirk, his words about how people would believe him over me, were there for everyone to hear. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. Finally I spoke. "I came to Pastor Harper for guidance, for comfort, for prayer. Instead he tried to take advantage of my pain. And I am not the only one." Martha stood up from her pew. "She's telling the truth. He did the same to me. Then Ellen. And to me." Patricia's voice trembled, but she stood tall. "He visited my home after my husband passed, and it was the same." The sanctuary was no longer quiet. Voices rose, some angry, some shocked. A few people demanded Harper step down immediately. Others looked at him with confusion and betrayal. Harper's face had gone pale. "These are lies," he said, his voice less steady now. "Fabrications meant to destroy my ministry. Maggie has always." "Enough," I said, my voice sharp. "I have nothing to gain from this. But I will not let you prey on another woman in this church." Daniel stepped forward from the back. "For the record," he said loudly, "I'm a licensed private investigator. That recording is genuine, unaltered, and admissible in court. I also have statements from these women, signed and dated." Harper's mouth opened, then closed. The room felt like it was holding its breath. I walked back to my pew, my hands steady now. The fear that had haunted me since that day in his office was gone. In its place was something stronger. Freedom. The service ended in chaos. Some members rushed to Harper, demanding explanations. Others came to me, hugging me, thanking me for speaking up. Thomas stayed in his seat, eyes fixed on the floor. Linda May slipped out before anyone could corner her. By the time I left the sanctuary, Harper was nowhere to be seen. That night I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a low voice said, "You think you've won, Maggie? This isn't over. Not by a long shot." And then the line went dead. The voice on the phone replayed in my head long after I hung up. "You think you've won, Maggie? This isn't over." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I'd lived long enough to know that men like Pastor Harper didn't just fade quietly into shame. They fought, they schemed, and they struck back when they felt cornered. And judging by the tightness in his voice, he was cornered. I sat in my kitchen, the warm light from the overhead lamp falling over my cup of tea. My hands were steady on the porcelain, but inside my thoughts raced like wildfire. The tea went cold before I even took a sip. The first thing I did was call Daniel. "It's him," I said the moment he picked up. "Or someone working for him. They called me tonight. I don't know what they're planning, but it's not over." Daniel's voice was calm, measured. "All right, Maggie. First things first, you don't answer any number you don't recognize. If they leave voicemails, keep them. If they send letters, keep those too. I'll run a trace on the call." "Daniel," I hesitated. "I'm not afraid for myself. But what if he goes after the other women?" "I'll speak to them," he said. "And I'll make sure you're not alone in this." That reassurance was the only thing that allowed me to sleep that night, though my dreams were restless. By Monday morning, the retaliation began. When I went to the grocery store, I could feel the shift in the air. In Greenville, news spread faster than pollen in spring, and the story of what happened in church had already made its way through every coffee group and quilting circle in town. Some people greeted me warmly. Others turned their backs. Mrs. Harper, the pastor's wife, stood at the end of the produce aisle, glaring at me as if I had stolen something from her. Her lips were pressed so tightly they were almost white. She didn't say a word, but the message in her eyes was clear. "I will never forgive you." In the frozen food section, a woman I'd known for 30 years pretended not to see me. In the parking lot, a man from the church muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Shame on you, dragging a man of God through the mud." I drove home with my groceries and a knot in my chest. I'd known speaking up would cost me something, but I hadn't expected the sting of losing people I'd called friends. That afternoon I got a visit from Martha, Ellen, and Patricia. We sat in my living room with the curtains drawn. "Maggie," Patricia said, wringing her hands, "I don't know if I can take this. My neighbor came over this morning and said I should be ashamed for making up lies. She doesn't even know the half of it." "That's exactly what he wants," I told her. "He wants to make us feel like we're the villains so we'll shut up. But we can't." Martha leaned forward, her eyes fierce despite the fine lines framing them. "I've been quiet for years. I'm not going back to that. If we back down now, he'll do this again to someone else." We talked for hours, making a pact that no matter what came next, we'd stand together. Still, I could see the fear in their faces. The next blow came on Wednesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table going over bills when the phone rang. It was my daughter Elaine, who lived 2 towns over. "Mama," she began, her tone already tense, "I just got a call from someone at your church. They said you've been making false accusations against Pastor Harper. That you're bitter and trying to ruin his life." Closed my eyes. "Elaine, listen to me." "Mama, I believe you," she interrupted. "But I need to know, are you safe? Because if this man is trying to turn people against you, I'm worried what else he might try." Her words settled over me like a shadow. 'Cause she was right. If he could twist the minds of people I'd known for decades, what was stopping him from going further? On Thursday, Daniel showed up at my door with a folder in his hands. "I've been digging," he said as soon as I let him in. "And I found something." We sat down and he spread the papers across my table. "Harper's got a side business. Real estate. Nothing illegal about that on paper, except that he's been using church funds to cover some of his personal investments. If this gets out, it's not just his ministry on the line. It's criminal." I stared at the documents. "And you're sure about this?" "Positive. I've got bank statements, wire transfers, even an email where he's bragging about flipping a property using blessed donations." A slow, steady heat rose in my chest. This wasn't just about what he'd done to me or the other women. This was about every person who had put their trust and their money into his hands, thinking it was going to God's work. "What's the plan?" asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "We let him dig his own hole a little deeper. Then we hand it to the right people." By Friday, Harper's retaliation became more direct. I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed with anonymous letters. Ugly, hateful things telling me I was a liar, that God would punish me, that I should repent before it's too late. I burned most of them, but I saved a few for Daniel. That evening, I noticed a black sedan idling down the street from my house. It was there for almost an hour before it drove away. When I told Daniel, he didn't hesitate. "I'll have someone keep watch. If they want to intimidate you, they're going to find out you're not alone." Saturday morning I got an unexpected knock at the door. It was Linda May. She stood there in a tight red dress, her lipstick perfectly applied, her expression smug. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I hope you're happy. You've turned the whole church upside down. Thomas is embarrassed, Pastor Harper's humiliated. And for what? Some little misunderstanding." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "A misunderstanding is forgetting someone's birthday, Linda. What he did to me and to other women is abuse. And you standing here defending him tells me exactly what kind of person you are." He smirked. "You've made enemies, Maggie. More than you realize. I'd watch my back if I were you." I didn't respond. I just stared at her until she turned and walked away. But my pulse was hammering in my ears. That night, Daniel called again. "Maggie, you might want to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting," I said. "They're planning something at tomorrow's service. I've got a source inside the church council. Harper's going to make a public statement, and it won't just be to defend himself. He's going to accuse you of trying to extort him. He's even got people willing to lie for him." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Extortion. It was a serious accusation, one that could ruin me if people believed it. "Let him try," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "If he wants a fight in front of the congregation, I'll give him one." The next morning, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my pearl necklace, the same one I wore the day I exposed him. Only this time I slipped something else into my purse, a small flash drive that held not just my recording, but the proof of his financial crimes. If Harper thought last Sunday was bad, he had no idea what was coming. The morning sun filtered through my bedroom curtains, painting golden streaks across the floor. For most people in Greenville, Sunday meant fellowship and worship. For me it was war. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the familiar lines on my face looking sharper today. My blonde hair was set perfectly, my pale blue dress pressed and neat. But it wasn't vanity, it was armor. In this town, appearances mattered, and if I was going to walk into that sanctuary again, I wanted every single person to see that I wasn't broken, scared, or hiding. Around my neck sat my pearl necklace, the same one I wore the day I played the recording. But inside my purse was something far more dangerous than pearls. A small flash drive. On it were the bank statements, wire transfers, and incriminating emails Daniel had uncovered. Proof that Pastor Harper had been siphoning church donations into his personal real estate ventures. I wasn't sure if I would use it today, but it was there, just in case. I pulled up to the church parking lot early, deliberately arriving before most of the congregation. The building loomed ahead, its white steeple rising against the morning sky like a sentinel. Daniel was waiting for me near the side entrance. "Morning, Maggie," he said, scanning the lot. "I've got eyes on 3 people from the council. Word is, Harper's going to make his statement near the end of the service." "Good," I replied. "Then we'll have the last word." We went inside. The air smelled faintly of lilies from the altar arrangements. I took my usual seat, 3rd pew from the front left-hand side. The choir was already rehearsing softly. The sanctuary began to fill. I could feel the undercurrent in the room, a tension humming beneath the polite smiles and handshakes. Few people nodded to me in quiet support. Others gave me cool, unreadable looks. Thomas entered with Linda May on his arm, their heads bent close together. They sat on the far right side, deliberately far from me. I caught Thomas glancing my way once, but his face gave nothing away. Finally, Harper emerged from the side door and took his place at the pulpit. He looked composed, confident, maybe even smug. "Good morning, brothers and sisters," he began, his deep voice rolling through the sanctuary. "Before we begin today's service, I want to take a moment to address recent events." The room quieted. All eyes were on him. He placed his hands on the pulpit and looked out at the congregation. Last Sunday, certain accusations were made against me. Accusations that are not only false, but deeply hurtful. I have served this church faithfully for over 40 years, and I have never acted in a way unbecoming of a pastor. Murmurs rippled through the room. Unfortunately, he continued, there are those who, for reasons I cannot understand, have chosen to slander me. Some have even gone so far as to suggest immoral intentions. His voice trembled slightly here, as though he were the one wounded. I forgive them, but I cannot ignore the damage to this church. These lies have sown division among us. He paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the blow. And in light of this, I must share something painful. I was approached by one of these individuals who attempted to pressure me, yes, extort me, in exchange for keeping quiet. Gasps filled the room. My jaw tightened, but I didn't flinch. This is a grave sin, he said solemnly. And I believe, as a community, we must pray for those who have been misled by anger and hurt. He stepped back slightly, as if his heart was heavy from speaking the words. The performance was almost flawless. Almost. I rose from my seat before anyone could process his last statement. Pastor Harper, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, you've had your say. Now it's my turn. Hush fell. Harper's eyes flickered. Not fear exactly, but irritation. I walked slowly to the front, my purse hanging from my shoulder. Last Sunday I shared a recording. Today I share something else. I turned to the congregation. Pastor Harper has accused me of extortion. But what he hasn't told you is why I might want him to keep quiet. It's not just about what he said to me. It's about what he's been doing with your money. I reached into my purse and held up the flash drive. On this is proof that our pastor has been using church donations to fund his personal real estate deals. I have copies of the bank transfers, the emails, even the property deeds. The room erupted, whispers, gasps, exclamations. Harper's face paled, then flushed crimson. That's a lie, he thundered. Fabricated documents. Daniel stood up in the back, his voice calm but firm. No, Pastor. These documents have already been verified by independent auditors. And copies have been sent to the State Attorney General's office as of this morning. The tension in the sanctuary was electric. People looked from me to Harper and back again. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at him with dawning anger. This is not about vengeance, I continued, my voice steady. It's about protecting this church and every person in it. We give our tithes believing they go to God's work, not into someone's pocket. Harper gripped the pulpit, his knuckles white. You'll regret this, Maggie. I took a step closer. No, Pastor. You will. The choir director stood abruptly. I think we need to end this service. But before anyone could move, Ellen stood up in her pew. I believed you for years, Pastor. I trusted you. But I believe her now. Because she's not the only one you've hurt. Martha joined in. You prayed on us when we were vulnerable. That's not the work of God. Voices began to rise around the sanctuary, some in agreement, others still defending him. The unity that had once defined this church was crumbling in real time. The elders moved toward the front, speaking in urgent whispers to Harper. He tried to keep his composure, but his eyes kept darting toward me and Daniel. He knew the tide was turning. I turned to leave, but as I stepped down from the platform, Harper's voice followed me. This isn't over, he called out. God will judge between us, Maggie Collins. I stopped, looked back over my shoulder and said, He already has. Outside, the sunlight felt sharper, the air cooler. Daniel caught up with me at the steps. You handled that perfectly, he said. By tonight, this whole town will know the truth. But I wasn't so sure. Men like Harper had a way of wriggling out of tight corners. And judging by the look in his eyes before I walked away, he wasn't finished with me yet. That night, as I was locking up my house, a brick smashed through my front window, wrapped in paper. I unfolded the note, and in bold black letters it read, Stop, or next time it won't be just glass. The sound of shattering glass was still ringing in my ears when I saw the brick lying among the shards on my living room carpet. I had lived in this little white house for 42 years, and not once had anyone broken so much as a flower pot on my porch. Now, glass glittered on the floor like ice, the night air cutting through the room with a sharp chill. I picked up the brick carefully, my hand steady even though my heart was pounding. The note was tied around it with rough twine. I slid it off, unfolded it, and read the message again. Stop, or next time it won't be just glass. For a moment, I just stood there in the silence, the hum of my refrigerator the only sound. Then I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He arrived 20 minutes later, headlights sweeping across my driveway. He stepped inside, took one look at the window, and cursed under his breath. "Someone's escalating," he said, putting on gloves to handle the brick. "This isn't just intimidation, this is a warning. And whoever did it wanted you to know they're willing to go further." Kept my voice calm. "Do you think it's Harper himself?" Daniel shook his head. "No. This feels more like one of his loyalists. The kind who think they're protecting him. But either way, it means we have to change our approach. What do you suggest?" "Yes. I'm setting up cameras around your property tonight. And I want you to stay somewhere else for a few days. At least until I know who's behind this." I hesitated. This house was my fortress, my refuge. But I wasn't foolish enough to ignore the danger. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to my daughter Elaine's house in the next town over. Elaine greeted me with a tight hug. "Mama, why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad?" "I didn't want you worrying more than you already are," I said. She wasn't convinced, but she didn't press. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking at every small noise. Meanwhile, Daniel kept watch on my house. On the third night, just past midnight, the cameras caught movement. A dark figure in a hoodie crept toward the side of my house, pausing at the window before pulling something from their pocket, a can of spray paint. Daniel and another man he'd hired confronted them before they could finish whatever they were planning. The man bolted, but not before the cameras caught his face. It was Jim Radford, one of Harper's most vocal supporters, a deacon who had been part of the church for nearly as long as I had. When Daniel showed me the footage the next day, my stomach turned. "I taught his children in Sunday school," I said quietly. "I never thought he'd." "That's what makes it dangerous," Daniel interrupted. "People you think you know can turn in an instant when they've decided you're the enemy." By the end of the week, Jim's little stunt was all over town. Some said it was proof I was making trouble. Others whispered that Harper's camp was getting desperate. Either way, the tension in Greenville had shifted. And then came the news that changed everything. Daniel called me early Saturday morning. "Maggie, I just got word from my contact at the Attorney General's office. They're moving forward with a formal investigation into Harper, not just for misuse of funds, but also for possible witness intimidation." "Witness intimidation," I repeated. "Those letters, the phone call, the brick, they're not going to let that slide. Especially with Jim Radford caught on camera." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the law would do what the court of public opinion couldn't. But Harper wasn't done playing his game. That Sunday, word spread that he wouldn't be leading the service. Instead, one of the associate pastors would be speaking, and Harper would be on sabbatical, while the church council prayed for wisdom. Some took this as a sign he was stepping back. Others saw it as a strategic retreat, time to gather his allies to rebuild his defenses. I decided to attend that service anyway. Not to stir trouble, but to make sure they saw I wasn't hiding. When I walked into the sanctuary, the room went quiet for a heartbeat before resuming its usual hum. Some people smiled, some avoided my eyes, and some glared openly. After the service, I was walking toward my car when a voice called out behind me. "Maggie!" I turned to see Harper himself, standing by the side door of the church, dressed in a casual jacket instead of his usual suit. He looked smaller somehow, but the glint in his eyes was the same. "You're destroying everything," he said quietly. his voice low enough that only I could hear. "I'm revealing the truth," I replied. He leaned closer, his breath cold against the morning air. "Be careful what you think you can control, Maggie. This town isn't as safe for you as you believe." I met his gaze without flinching. "Neither is it for you, Pastor." By Tuesday, Daniel had gotten confirmation that subpoenas were being issued for Harper's financial records. That was the good news. The bad news came that night when Elaine shook me awake at 2 a.m. "Mama, your car. It's on fire." We rushed to the window, and sure enough, the driveway glowed orange. Flames licked up the side of my old sedan, black smoke curling into the night. Elaine had already called the fire department, but by the time they arrived, the car was nothing but a charred shell. The fire marshal suspected arson. I didn't need a suspect list. I already knew whose circle it came from. Daniel was livid when he saw the wreckage. "They've crossed the line. This isn't just intimidation anymore. It's criminal destruction of property. We can tie this to Harper's people, I'm sure of it." But that night, sitting in Elaine's kitchen, sipping tea to calm my nerves, I realized something. The more they tried to scare me, the more determined I became. They thought age made me weak. They thought living alone made me vulnerable. They thought my faith made me too soft to fight back. They were wrong on all 3 counts. The next morning, Daniel handed me an envelope. Inside was a court date, sooner than I expected. Harper would be facing a preliminary hearing in less than 2 weeks. And I planned to walk into that courthouse with more than just evidence. I planned to bring the one witness who could destroy his entire facade in a single sentence. The envelope with the court date sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. 2 weeks. That was all the time I had to prepare. It wasn't enough to simply show up with the evidence Daniel had gathered. I needed to make sure there would be no wiggle room for Harper to slip through. And that meant bringing in someone whose testimony could cut through any lie he tried to spin. That someone was Anna Crawford. Anna was a name Harper hadn't heard in years. She had been a young secretary at the church 25 years ago, just out of college, with bright eyes and a soft voice. One day she'd simply vanished. No one knew why she left so suddenly. Rumors swirled, but no one pressed for answers. I did, quietly. And with Daniel's help, I found her. She was living 3 states away now, in a modest townhouse with a small garden out front. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her smile was gentle when she opened the door to me. "Maggie Collins," she said softly, almost in disbelief. I haven't heard that name in decades. We sat at her kitchen table over coffee, and I told her everything. Harper's harassment, the other women, the threats. She listened without interrupting, her fingers curled tightly around her mug. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "He tried with me too. Back then I was too scared to fight him. Just left, disappeared. But if you're taking him to court, I'll stand with you." Her voice was steady, but her eyes brimmed with something I recognized. Not just anger, but the relief of finally speaking after years of silence. Back in Greenville, things were heating up. The Sunday after my car was burned, the church service felt different. The sanctuary was half full, and the murmurs before the sermon were sharper, more fragmented. The divide in the congregation was now visible. Those who still stood by Harper sat in one cluster, their eyes watchful, while those who believed me kept a cautious distance. I didn't go to stir trouble, but I wanted them to see I was still here, still standing. After the service, a woman I'd never spoken to before came up to me. "My name's Carol," she said quietly. "You don't know me, but believe you. And if you need me to speak in court, I will." I thanked her, but my mind was already ticking over. How many more were out there, silent but ready? And how many would have to watch someone else speak before they found their own voice? That week, the intimidation campaign ramped up again. On Tuesday morning, I found the word liar spray-painted in red across my front porch. On Wednesday, a dead crow was left on my doorstep, a grotesque message meant to unsettle me. I called Daniel each time, and he documented everything. "They're getting desperate," he said. "Desperate people make mistakes." And mistakes are what we need. The Saturday before the hearing, Daniel came over with a plan. "We're not just going to walk into that courtroom with evidence," he said. "We're going to control the narrative. I've arranged for a local reporter to be there, someone who's been covering corruption cases for years. If Harper thinks this is just going to be a closed-door hearing, he's in for a shock." I smiled for the first time in days. Let him sweat. 2 days before the court date, I met Anna at a little diner just outside Greenville. She had the look of someone bracing for a storm, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "When I was his secretary," she began, "he used to accidentally brush against me. Comments about my clothes. Then one night after Bible study, he locked the office door and—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "It didn't go further because someone knocked. But I knew I couldn't stay after that. He would have kept pushing." Her statement was typed, signed, and notarized by the time we left. Daniel's eyes lit up when he saw it. This could be the final nail in his coffin. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep much. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, staring at the cross-stitch sampler on the wall that read, "The truth will set you free." The truth had set me free the moment I spoke it out loud in that sanctuary. But now it needed to bind him. Around midnight my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "If you show up tomorrow, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." I stared at the screen, then set the phone down without replying. If they thought fear would keep me away, they didn't know me at all. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were busier than I expected. A small crowd had gathered, reporters, curious townsfolk, and a few members of my church. I saw familiar faces in both groups, supporters who nodded in quiet encouragement, and loyalists of Harper who glared as I passed. Harper himself arrived in a dark suit, flanked by his attorney. He didn't look at me at first, but when our eyes met, his mouth curled into a tight, humorless smile. Inside, the courtroom was modest, the kind of place where local disputes were usually over property lines or noise complaints. But today it felt charged, every seat filled. The proceedings began with the financial allegations. Daniel's evidence was presented methodically. The bank transfers, the emails, the property records. Harper's attorney objected often, but most were overruled. Then came the testimonies. Martha, Ellen, and Patricia each spoke briefly, their voices steady. Then Anna took the stand. Her account was calm but devastating. She spoke of the comments, the unwanted touches, the night in the locked office. The room was silent except for her voice. Harper shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. When she stepped down, she walked past me and squeezed my hand. I felt a surge of gratitude. By the end of the day, Harper looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The judge didn't make a final ruling, that would come later, but he announced that there was sufficient cause to move the case forward to a full trial. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the closest I'd been. As I was leaving the courthouse, a man I didn't recognize slipped a folded note into my hand before disappearing into the crowd. I opened it and my blood ran cold. "You've won this round. But we know where your grandchildren live." The note in my hand felt heavier than any brick, heavier than the flash drive that had cracked Harper's image wide open. "We know where your grandchildren live." It wasn't just a threat against me anymore. It was against the only people in this world I would lay down my life for. My grandchildren were innocent, untouched by the ugliness of all this. And now, Harper's shadow had reached for them. For the first time since this began, I felt a spike of something colder than anger. Fear. I folded the note and slipped it into my purse, my fingers curling into fists. If they thought threatening my family would make me back down, they didn't know the lengths I was willing to go. I called Daniel as soon as I got into my car. "They've crossed the line," I said, my voice low. "They mentioned my grandchildren." He was silent for a beat, then said, "Maggie, you need to let me handle this. You can't confront them directly." "I'm not planning to confront them," I said, "but I am going to make sure they regret the day they even thought about my family." Daniel didn't argue, but I could hear the concern in his tone. We'll put protective measures in place. I'll have someone watching your daughter's house around the clock. And I'll talk to the prosecutor about adding this to the intimidation charges. That evening, I drove to Elaine's house. My daughter met me at the door with a frown. "Mama, you look pale. What happened?" I didn't want to alarm her more than necessary, but I told her about the note. Her face drained of color. "We have to keep the kids home from school." "No," I interrupted. "We keep living our lives. If we hide, they win. But we'll be careful. I've already got Daniel arranging protection." I hugged my grandkids tighter than usual that night. They didn't know why, but they didn't ask. The next day, Daniel showed up with a plan that made my pulse quicken. "I've got a source inside Harper's circle," he said. "They've been feeding me bits of information, and now they've confirmed something big. Harper's been holding private prayer meetings with a small group of loyalists. That's where the intimidation orders are coming from." "Where are these meetings happening?" "Yes. In the basement of the old community hall on Pine Street. They meet late, after 9 p.m. when no one's around. I think it's time we got eyes and ears in there." That night, Daniel and I drove to Pine Street. We stayed far back, watching the flicker of light through the small basement windows. A handful of cars were parked nearby. Daniel handed me a small earpiece. "You stay in the car. I'm going to plant a recorder. If we catch them talking about the threats or planning more, we'll have them on conspiracy charges." I sat in the dark, my heart pounding as I watched him slip around the side of the building. Minutes felt like hours. Then I heard voices through the earpiece, muffled at first, then clearer as Daniel adjusted the device. "Maggie Collins needs to learn her place," a man said. I recognized Jim Radford's voice. "We can't touch her now," another voice replied. "Too much heat from the cops." "That's why we put pressure where it hurts," someone else added. "Her family. She'll fold if she thinks they're in danger." And then, unmistakably, Harper's voice. "She won't fold. She's stubborn. That's why we make an example of her. But no blood, we're not criminals. Just enough to scare her back into silence." My stomach turned. It was like hearing a wolf calmly discuss how to toy with its prey. Daniel returned to the car half an hour later, his expression grim. "We've got them, Maggie. Every word." "Then we take it to the police tonight," I said. The police chief listened to the recording twice before looking up at us. "This is more than enough for an arrest. But Maggie, you need to know this will cause a storm. People will come out swinging for him, even with the evidence." "I've been in the storm for weeks," I replied. "It's time they got wet too." 2 days later, the headline in the local paper read, "Pastor William Harper arrested for financial fraud, witness intimidation." The article detailed the charges, the recording from Pine Street, and the accounts from multiple women in the congregation. His mugshot was a far cry from the polished, smiling man who used to preach every Sunday. His hair mussed, his expression hard. But the arrest didn't end it. If anything, it made things more dangerous. That night, my phone lit up with messages, some congratulating me, others filled with venom. "You've destroyed this town. You'll burn for what you've done. Liar." One message made me pause. "This isn't over. The trial will break you." It was then I realized they still thought they could shake me. They didn't understand that every threat only made me stronger. The Sunday after his arrest, the church was a strange place. The pews were half empty, the air heavy with uncertainty. The associate pastor led the service, his voice shaking. Afterward, several women approached me, some in tears, thanking me for speaking out. One whispered, "You saved me." I thought I was alone. In that moment, I knew that no matter how messy the trial became, it was worth it. A week later, Daniel called with news that made my breath catch. "Maggie, someone's posted bail for Harper. He's out." And then, after a pause, "And I think I know who paid it, but you're not going to like the answer." When Daniel said, "You're not going to like the answer," I thought maybe he'd found some wealthy church member willing to throw themselves on the sword for Harper. I wasn't prepared for the name he gave me. Thomas, Daniel said. I stared at him, not quite believing my ears. My husband. Yeah. He wired the money himself. In full. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking under me. After everything, after the affair, after the way Harper came after me. My voice trailed off. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream or laugh at the absurdity of it. Daniel's jaw tightened. I don't think this is just loyalty to Harper. I think Harper's got something on Thomas. Something your husband doesn't want getting out. It made a sick kind of sense. Thomas had been distant for years. Secretive even before I discovered the texts from Linda May. If Harper had dirt on him, it would explain why he was willing to bail out a man accused of fraud and harassment, a man who had openly tried to manipulate me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my cup of tea until it went cold. My mind was a jumble of memories. Every time Thomas came home late, every time he avoided looking me in the eye. If I wanted to take Harper down completely, I might have to expose whatever secret he was holding over my husband. And that meant digging into Thomas's life in a way I never had before. It wasn't a comfortable thought. Part of me still clung to the decades we'd spent together, the good years before everything rotted underneath. But comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. The next morning, Daniel came by with a folder. I did some digging, he said. You might want to brace yourself. Inside were photocopies of bank statements. Not Harper's this time, but Thomas's. Transfers to an account in another state. Payments labeled as consulting fees to someone named Gerald Price. Who is Gerald Price? Yes. Daniel's mouth twisted. A fixer. He's known for cleaning up problems. Sometimes that means paying people to keep quiet. Sometimes it means other things. The implication was clear. I looked at Daniel. So Harper's leverage over Thomas is that your husband's been paying hush money for years. I don't have the full picture yet, but I'm betting it's ugly. That evening I confronted Thomas. He was in the den, flipping through channels, pretending he hadn't seen the headlines about Harper's bail. Why did you bail him out? Asked. He didn't look at me. It's not what you think. Then what is it? He finally turned, his eyes hard. You don't understand. Harper's been a friend to me for decades. A friend. He tried to take advantage of your wife. His jaw worked like he was chewing over the right words. It's complicated. I took a step closer. What does he have on you, Thomas? That got his attention. His eyes flickered just for a second, and I saw the truth there. You don't want to know, he said finally, his voice low. Yes, I replied, I do. Because whatever it is, it's going to come out in court, and you need to decide whether you want to be the one to tell me or have me find out from the prosecutor. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. But it wasn't. Not for me. The next few days were tense. Harper was back in town, but not at the pulpit. He was keeping a low profile, but whispers followed him everywhere. The trial date had been set for 6 weeks out, and in the meantime, his attorney was working overtime trying to discredit every witness, including me. One morning Daniel called. Maggie, I think we've got it. The thing Harper's holding over Thomas. Tell me. It's from about 15 years ago. There was a car accident, hit and run. The victim was a young man, late 20s. He survived but was badly injured. The driver's description matches Thomas's car at the time. Harper was the first on the scene. He handled it quietly, paid off the victim through that Gerald Price guy. It never went to the police. Closed my eyes. The weight of it hit me hard. Thomas wasn't just guilty of betrayal. He was guilty of letting someone else's life be destroyed without consequence. And Harper had been holding it over him ever since. That night I couldn't sleep. The truth gnawed at me. If I used this in court, it would destroy Thomas. But if I didn't, Harper might use it first, twisting it to his advantage. I thought about the women Harper had hurt, about the threats, the intimidation, about the note mentioning my grandchildren. And I realized something. This wasn't about protecting Thomas anymore. He'd made his choices. It was about ending Harper, once and for all. Daniel and I met the next day at the diner. I slid the folder with Thomas's connection to the hit and run across the table. "Get this into the right hands," I said. Daniel studied me for a moment. "Once this goes in, there's no taking it back. Your marriage. Your name." "My marriage ended the day I found those texts from Linda May," I said flatly. "As for my name, it's the truth that will protect it. Not silence." 3 days later, the story broke in the local paper. New evidence links Harper to cover-up of 15-year-old hit and run. It didn't name Thomas outright, not yet, but the implication was there. And suddenly, Harper's moral authority was hanging by a thread. The backlash was immediate. Protesters gathered outside the church, half demanding Harper's resignation, half defending him. Social media in Greenville turned into a war zone of accusations and counter-accusations. I stayed quiet through it all, letting the chaos work in my favor. But Harper didn't. He called me 2 nights later. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. His voice was cold. "You've gone too far, Maggie. This trial is going to be a bloodbath. You think you've hurt me. You've just signed your husband's death warrant." "Funny," I said, my voice steady. "I thought you believed in forgiveness." "I believe in survival," he snapped. "And you won't survive this." I hung up before he could say more. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline of knowing he was rattled. The next morning, Daniel called with urgency in his voice. "Maggie, you need to get down to the courthouse. Harper just filed a countersuit against you. And the charges, they're bad." The courthouse steps looked steeper that morning. Maybe it was the weight of what Daniel had just told me over the phone. Harper had filed a countersuit accusing me of defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and coordinating a smear campaign to destroy his ministry. If that man had a shred of shame left in his body, it had been surgically removed. I climbed those steps with my chin high, the pearl necklace cool against my collarbone. Daniel was waiting inside, a thick binder under his arm. "Don't let the theatrics throw you," he murmured. "This is his last move. A desperate man's move." Inside, the hearing room was packed. Not just reporters this time. Townsfolk filled every seat, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and grim anticipation. On one side sat Harper, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear. On the other sat me, Daniel, and the prosecutor assigned to the original case. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, entered and called us to order. Harper's attorney went first, standing with the smooth confidence of someone who thought charm could substitute for evidence. "My client," he began, "has been the victim of a coordinated character assassination. The defendant, Mrs. Maggie Collins, has repeatedly made false and damaging statements, including accusations of financial impropriety and moral misconduct, without sufficient evidence." Without sufficient evidence. I nearly laughed. If only they knew how much I had. When it was our turn, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, this countersuit is not only unfounded, it is a transparent attempt to intimidate and silence a key witness in an ongoing criminal case. We have extensive documentation, verified by independent parties, supporting every claim made by Mrs. Collins, including recordings, financial records, and corroborating testimonies from multiple victims." Then Daniel stood, holding up a manila folder. "And since this countersuit has opened the door, we're submitting additional evidence, tying Mr. Harper not only to misuse of church funds but to the cover-up of a hit-and-run 15 years ago, in which he facilitated payments to silence the victim." The judge's eyes flicked to Harper. He shifted in his seat. The courtroom held its breath as witness after witness took the stand. Martha, Ellen, and Patricia spoke again, unwavering. Anna Crawford told her story in full detail, her voice shaking but resolute. The financial expert we'd hired walked the court through Harper's bank records, pointing out the patterns that matched property purchases. Then came the part Harper hadn't expected, Thomas. I hadn't been sure if he'd appear. We hadn't spoken much since I confronted him, But the subpoena left him no choice. He took the stand with his shoulders stiff and his eyes darting toward Harper like a trapped animal. Under questioning, he admitted to making the bail payment. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he confirmed the hit-and-run and Harper's role in covering it up. The room went dead silent when he said the words, "I owed him." He made sure I never forgot it. For the first time, I saw something in Harper's eyes that looked like real fear. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told the court about walking into that parsonage seeking comfort and guidance, only to be met with a predator's smile. I described the threats, the brick through my window, the dead crow on my porch, the fire that took my car. And then I looked straight at Harper and said, "You thought I would be too old, too small, and too afraid to fight you. But you forgot one thing, Pastor. I've lived long enough to know that the truth always outlasts the lies." Harper's attorney tried to rattle me on cross-examination, suggesting I was exaggerating for revenge. But every time he pushed, I answered with calm, precise facts. The dates, the recordings, the corroborating witnesses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. By mid-afternoon, it was clear the judge had heard enough. She leaned forward, her voice measured but firm. "This countersuit is without merit and is hereby dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, given the evidence presented today, the court finds substantial grounds to expand the scope of the criminal proceedings against Mr. Harper to include charges of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice." The words landed like a hammer. Harper's attorney's face drained of color. Harper himself slumped in his seat. When the gavel came down, the room erupted. Some cheering, some muttering in disbelief. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of weeks, no years, lift from my shoulders. Outside, reporters swarmed, but Daniel guided me down the steps. "We're not done," he said quietly. "The trial is still ahead. But after today, he's not walking away from this clean." He nodded. For the first time I believed him. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. The prosecution built their case brick by brick, each piece of evidence tightening the noose. Harper's support in the community began to crumble. Even those who'd once defended him started to keep their distance. Thomas moved out. We didn't have a dramatic fight, just a quiet, mutual understanding that whatever marriage we'd had was gone. The trial itself was grueling. Harper fought every step of the way, but the evidence was too strong. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, there was no celebration in me, just a deep, quiet relief. He was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of early parole. On the day he was taken away, I walked past the church one last time. The doors were locked, the sign out front blank. The sanctuary that had once been my spiritual home was now just a building, but it no longer had his shadow in it. I didn't hate Harper. Not anymore. Hatred was too heavy to carry. What I felt was something cleaner. The certainty that he could never hurt another woman the way he tried to hurt me. In the weeks after, the phone calls slowed, the threats stopped, and Greenville began to heal in its own quiet way. The women who had spoken out started meeting every Thursday for coffee. We weren't just survivors, we were a sisterhood now. And me. I went back to my garden. I tended my roses, baked pies for the church bake sale. A new church, one led by a pastor who understood that leadership was about service, not power. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with my youngest granddaughter. She was painting with watercolors, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mama Maggie," she said suddenly, "why don't you ever get scared?" I smiled, smoothing a strand of hair from her face. "Oh, sweetheart, I do get scared. But I learned something a long time ago. Courage isn't about never feeling fear. It's about doing what's right even when you're afraid." She nodded thoughtfully, then went back to her painting. As I watched her, I thought of every moment I'd been tempted to give in, to stay quiet, to let Harper's lies stand. And I thought of how close I'd come to walking away. But I didn't. And because of that, justice, however long it took, had the final word. If you believe that speaking up can change everything, even when it feels impossible, share this story. Tell someone who needs to hear it. And remember, silence protects the predator, not the victim.